I stood before my father's grave, the October air in Boston carrying a sharp chill that cut through my coat. The cemetery was quiet except for the rustling of dry leaves, yet inside me a storm was raging. My father, Harris, had been the towering figure of my life, the man who built a massive construction company from nothing. And now, the man who once seemed unshakable was gone, lying beneath a polished coffin that felt far too still, far too final. As I gazed at the carved letters on the granite headstone, 1,000 thoughts circled my mind. What had he truly thought of me in his final moments? Did he believe I had failed him for walking away from the family business? Or had he quietly forgiven me, the way only a father could? The questions burned inside, heavy and unanswered, leaving me with an ache that no words could soothe. My name is Julia, and I am 42 years old. This is the story of how my life, once steady and predictable, was thrown into chaos after my father's death, and how the choices others made in greed forced me to confront truths I never expected. At the graveside, my mother Susan clutched a tissue, her eyes swollen from crying. My sister Olivia stood close, holding her son Jacob's hand. The little boy's face was streaked with tears as he whispered, "Goodbye, Grandpa." It broke my heart. Then there was Mark, Olivia's husband, standing a few feet away, his expression cold, almost impatient. While we mourned, he muttered under his breath with a half-smirk, "So, Harris finally died." The word struck me like ice water. I wanted to scream at him, to demand he show respect, but I bit my tongue. This was not the place for anger. Later that day, at the reading of the will, the final blow came. My father had left the majority of his estate, his company, properties, and nearly everything else, to Mark. My heart dropped as the attorney's words echoed through the room. When my turn came, the only thing listed under my name was an old pickup truck, my father's favorite, the one he had driven for years. Mark leaned back in his chair, his voice dripping with mockery. "Well, looks like the company's mine now. That truck suits you, Julia. Maybe it'll remind you of what you walked away from." His laughter rang in my ears as everyone else sat in stunned silence. My chest tightened, but I held my head high. To them, it may have looked like I was left with scraps, but something told me that old truck held more than anyone could see. Growing up in Boston, our family name carried weight. My father, Harris, had carved his reputation into the very foundations of the city with steel beams and concrete towers. People admired him for his business instincts, his relentless discipline, and his ability to turn small projects into sprawling enterprises. To him, legacy was everything. He believed each child should carry the torch of his achievements, expanding what he had built with his own 2 hands. But I, Julia, had always been different. From the time I was a girl, I felt drawn to classrooms and books more than construction sites and boardrooms. I loved the sound of chalk scraping across a blackboard, the excitement of young minds discovering something new. By the time I graduated high school, I knew I wanted to be a teacher. When I told my father, his face hardened in disappointment. "Teaching? That won't build empires," he said. "You're my eldest daughter, Julia. You should be preparing to run this company." We argued countless times. He insisted I study business, and for a short while I did. But every lecture hall I sat in felt like a prison. Every spreadsheet drained my spirit. Finally, with shaking hands but a determined heart, I switched my major to education. That was the day the wall between us grew higher. For years, we spoke only in short, strained exchanges, sometimes through my mother Susan, more often through my sister Olivia. Olivia tried to keep peace. She would call me, her voice soft and encouraging. "Dad's just stubborn, Julia. He doesn't mean half of what he says. He misses you, even if he won't admit it." She and her husband Mark often presented gifts to my father for birthdays or anniversaries, pretending they were from me. I didn't ask them to, but part of me was grateful, even as I wondered if it only widened the misunderstanding between us. Then came the news that shattered everything: cancer. When I learned my father's diagnosis, my world shifted. Suddenly, the years of arguments felt small compared to the reality of losing him. Without hesitation, I resigned from my teaching job in New York and returned to Boston. Walking into my childhood home felt strange, as though I were stepping into a place frozen in time. At first, my father looked at me with surprise, his face thin and pale from treatments. We didn't exchange grand speeches, only simple words. I brought him water, prepared his meals, helped him move when he was too weak. Sometimes he would mutter a quiet "thank you." Those 2 words meant more to me than any inheritance. For the first time in years, I sensed a fragile bridge being rebuilt between us. Olivia and my mother were relieved to see us together again, though Mark seemed less pleased. He made subtle remarks, questioning my motives. "Back so suddenly, Julia?" "Seems convenient," he once said, his voice cool. I ignored him, focusing on my father. Despite our efforts, the illness consumed him. Nights blurred into days of hospital visits and silent prayers. And then, too soon, the battle ended. My father's chapter closed, leaving us with grief, unanswered questions, and, though I didn't know it yet, the spark of a storm that would engulf us all. The funeral stretched into the late afternoon, the autumn sun sinking low behind Boston's skyline. Family, friends, and longtime employees of my father's company filled the church pews, offering condolences and sharing quiet stories of Harris's achievements. Their words painted him as a visionary, a man who built not just buildings but opportunities for countless families. Listening, I felt a mixture of pride and sorrow. Yet amid the grief, one person stood out: Mark. He lingered near the back, his arms folded, his expression detached. When mourners approached Olivia to express sympathy, he interrupted with shallow jokes or dismissive nods. His presence was less about honoring Harris and more about waiting for what came next, the reading of the will. Later that evening, we gathered in a polished law office in downtown Boston. The air smelled faintly of leather and ink, the weight of the moment pressing down on us. Susan clutched her rosary beads, Olivia kept Jacob close by her side, and I sat silently, bracing myself. The attorney opened a thick folder, his voice steady as he began. "To Mr. Mark Reynolds," he read, "I bequeath the majority of my estate, including controlling shares in Harris Construction, all corporate properties and related assets." The words landed like blows. My mother gasped softly, Olivia's face drained of color, and Jacob stared blankly, too young to understand. I sat frozen, my heart pounding. Mark's lips curled into a smirk as he adjusted his tie, soaking in the moment like a conqueror. "And to my daughter, Julia," the attorney continued, "I leave my 1988 Ford pickup truck." The silence that followed was deafening. A truck? That was all. My chest tightened as Mark leaned back in his chair, laughter bubbling in his throat. "Well, Julia," he said mockingly, "looks like Dad knew what he was doing. The company's mine now, and you, well, that old truck suits you. Maybe you can drive back to your little classrooms with it." I clenched my fists beneath the table, heat rising in my face. Every instinct screamed to lash out, to remind him of the nights I spent caring for Harris while Mark played golf and entertained clients. But I stayed silent. My father's memory deserved my composure, not Mark's theatrics. The attorney's voice trailed off with minor details, but none of it registered. Mark had what he wanted: control, wealth, power. To everyone else, I looked defeated, left with scraps of a legacy. Yet deep inside, a thought flickered like a hidden flame. Perhaps my father had left me more than Mark could ever understand. The day after the will was read, I walked out to the driveway where the old Ford pickup sat. Rust clung to its edges, the paint had dulled, but it still carried an air of quiet dignity. I ran my hand across the hood, remembering how my father used to polish it every Sunday morning, a small ritual that seemed almost sacred to him. It felt strange that out of everything he owned, this was the piece left to me. Sliding into the driver's seat, I inhaled the faint smell of worn leather and engine oil. The keys jingled in my hand, cool and heavy, before I turned the ignition. The engine roared to life, surprisingly strong for its age, and the dashboard lights flickered on. That's when I noticed something unusual: the GPS screen. Instead of a blank map, A route had already been programmed. A blue line stretched across the screen, ending at a set of coordinates rather than a named address. I frowned. My father never relied on technology. He preferred paper maps or simple directions. Why would his truck have a route saved? Curiosity tugged at me until I couldn't resist. I shifted into gear and eased the truck onto the road, following the glowing blue line through the streets of Boston and into the quieter suburbs. After nearly an hour of driving, I pulled up to a modest house tucked behind tall trees. It wasn't grand or flashy like the homes my father usually designed. This one was humble, warm, almost hidden from the world. My stomach tightened with questions as I stepped out, gravel crunching under my shoes. The front door creaked open before I could knock. Standing there was my mother, Susan. Her eyes were red, not just from grief, but from holding onto secrets too long. "I've been waiting for you, Julia," she said softly. "Come in, dear." Inside, the house felt different, cozy and simple. There were no trophies of success here, only plain furniture, a faint scent of cedar, and the sound of silence. My mother poured tea and motioned for me to sit. I stared at her, bewildered. "Mom, what is this place? And why was it in Dad's truck?" She placed a trembling hand on mine. "This was your father's refuge. When the weight of the business became too heavy, he came here with me. It was our rule. When things grew tense, we came here to find peace." Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a thick brown envelope. "Your father wanted you to have this." My fingers shook as I opened it, revealing a handwritten letter and documents. The letter carried words I never thought I'd hear from Harris: apologies for the distance, gratitude for my return, and a confession of deep pride. Tears blurred my vision as I read. Beneath the letter were bank documents, an account in my mother's name, untouched and secret, with a fortune large enough to rival what Mark had received. "This is your father's true gift," Susan whispered. "He didn't want Mark's greed to touch it. Now it's yours to share with Olivia. He trusted you." For the first time since the funeral, hope stirred in my chest. Maybe my father had left me far more than a truck after all. Mark wasted no time stepping into his new role as head of Harris Construction. Within days of the funeral, he was parading through the Boston office as though he had personally built the company from the ground up. He strutted down the hallways with his designer suits and arrogant smirk, shaking hands only when it benefited him, dismissing employees whose loyalty had been earned through decades of service to my father. At first, he played the part of a confident leader. He held meetings in the glass-walled conference room overlooking the city, talking about vision and growth. But behind the buzzwords, his actions revealed his true character. He spent more time on the golf course than at his desk, justifying it as networking. He threw extravagant dinners at high-end restaurants, charging everything to the company account. When questioned, he snapped, "This is how deals get made." Harris would have wanted it this way. But Harris had never wasted money. My father believed in precision, discipline, and respect for the workers who carried his projects forward. Mark had none of these values. Soon, the cracks in his leadership became impossible to ignore. Construction deadlines were missed, safety reports were overlooked, and key executives who had been with my father for years began handing in their resignations. "We can't work under him," one of them told me quietly. "Your father built this place on trust. Mark is tearing it apart." I watched from the sidelines, trying to stay calm, even as frustration burned inside me. I wanted to storm into the office and tell Mark he was unworthy of my father's legacy, but I knew he would only mock me. Instead, I observed and listened, taking mental notes of every careless decision he made. At home, Olivia tried to defend him at first. "He's under pressure, Julia," she whispered one evening. "Maybe he just needs time." But I could see the doubt in her eyes. Susan said nothing but wore her grief like a heavy cloak, knowing her husband's life's work was being misused. Even little Jacob noticed the tension. "Uncle Mark doesn't play with me anymore," he murmured one night. "He's always angry." Mark's arrogance only grew as the company faltered. He laughed off complaints from investors, boasted about his innovative strategies, and scolded employees for problems he himself had created. He even hinted at selling parts of the company to cover his spending habits, a move that would have horrified my father. The city of Boston had once admired Harris Construction as a pillar of integrity. Now whispers of mismanagement began to spread. Clients hesitated to sign contracts, worried that deadlines wouldn't be met. Workers muttered under their breath about quitting. The foundation my father had laid was cracking, and Mark either couldn't see it or refused to admit it. Every night, as I lay awake replaying his reckless choices, my father's letter echoed in my mind. Protect what I built. Those words became my resolve. I would not let Mark destroy Harris Construction, not while I had the means to stop him. The secret account my father had left through my mother became more than a gift. It became a weapon. Each time I looked at the bank documents, I felt the weight of his trust pressing down on me. He hadn't chosen me to inherit the company directly, but he had given me the means to safeguard it. I couldn't let him down. Quietly, I began meeting with some of my father's most loyal executives, men and women who had worked by his side for decades. We gathered in coffee shops, private dining rooms, and even one old project site after hours. They were exhausted by Mark's arrogance and desperate for a change. Julia, one of them told me, if Harris could see what's happening now, he'd be heartbroken. But we'll stand with you. Just tell us what to do. With their guidance, I started buying company shares that Mark had carelessly allowed to float on the open market. Piece by piece, I increased my stake, keeping my identity hidden behind trusted lawyers. Each purchase felt like reclaiming a piece of my father's legacy. Slowly, the balance of power began to shift. At home, I kept my plans secret. Olivia was still struggling, torn between loyalty to her husband and disappointment in his behavior. I didn't want to drag her into my scheme until the time was right. My mother, however, knew everything. She sat with me at the kitchen table night after night, quietly encouraging me. Your father would be proud, she said. You're fighting for him in your own way. Mark, oblivious, continued to live in his bubble of wealth and arrogance. He bragged about deals that never materialized, berated employees in front of clients, and splurged on vacations under the guise of business travel. He thought he was untouchable, the king of Harris Construction. What he didn't realize was that the ground beneath him was already slipping away. I kept a folder of evidence, records of his misuse of funds, contracts signed for personal benefit, expenses that screamed fraud. Each document was a nail in the coffin of his leadership. I was patient, waiting until I had both the legal standing and the moral authority to confront him. The day was coming when I would walk into his office, not as the overlooked daughter who inherited only a truck, but as the rightful protector of Harris Construction. The thought gave me strength. For now, I stayed in the shadows, letting him believe he had won. But in truth, the game had only just begun. The morning of the showdown dawned crisp and gray over Boston. I woke before sunrise, my mind clear and steady, as though every sleepless night and anxious plan had finally crystallized into certainty. Today was the day I would confront Mark, not as the grieving daughter left with scraps, but as the majority shareholder of Harris Construction. When I arrived at the company's downtown office, I felt the weight of memory pressing down. My father had walked these halls countless times, greeting employees by name, asking about their families, reminding everyone that success was built on loyalty as much as on steel and stone. Now those same halls echoed with silence. Many desks sat empty after resignations, and the remaining staff moved about stiffly, avoiding Mark's wrath whenever possible. I headed straight to the boardroom where the extraordinary general meeting had been scheduled. The long mahogany table gleamed under the harsh lights, a symbol of authority. One by one, the directors and executives I had quietly rallied began to file in. Some nodded at me with subtle encouragement. Others kept their expressions neutral, wary of Mark's influence. My hands trembled slightly as I shuffled the papers in front of me, but I forced my shoulders back. I had prepared for this moment. Mark entered last, wearing a sharp suit and his usual smirk. "What is this, Julia?" he scoffed. "Playing boardroom dress-up? You don't belong here. This is my company." I stood, my voice steady. "Not anymore." He froze mid-step, then laughed mockingly. Don't tell me you've been buying a few shares, thinking it gives you a say. You've never lifted a finger in this business. I slid a stack of documents across the table. As of this morning, I hold 62% of Harris Construction's shares. Effective immediately, the board has voted to remove you as CEO. The room buzzed with whispers. Mark's face turned pale before flushing red. He grabbed the papers, scanning them with trembling hands. This is a joke. You think this will hold up in court? I'll bury you in lawsuits. I met his glare. Go ahead. Every document here is airtight. And I have evidence, records of your misuse of company funds, personal vacations charged as business trips, contracts signed for your benefit alone. Do you want me to read them aloud? Mark's bravado faltered. How did you even get this information? Because people trusted me, I said calmly. The same people you insulted, ignored, and drove away. They gave me everything I needed to protect what my father built. He slammed his fist on the table, making Jacob flinch in Olivia's arms at the back of the room. This is jealousy, nothing more. Harris wanted me to run this company. No, I replied firmly. He wanted it to survive. He misjudged you, and I won't let his legacy die because of your greed. For a moment, silence hung heavy in the room. Then the lead director cleared his throat. Ms. Harris is correct. The vote has been passed. Mr. Reynolds, your dismissal is official. Mark's face contorted with rage. He crumpled the documents in his hands and threw them onto the table. You think this is over? You think you can humiliate me like this and walk away? You'll regret it, Julia. I didn't flinch. The only one who should regret anything is you, for underestimating this family. With that, 2 security guards stepped forward. Mark shoved past them, his threats echoing down the hallway as he stormed out. The room exhaled as though a storm had passed. I gathered the papers with steady hands, my heart pounding. The battle was far from over, but for the first time since my father's death, I felt his presence beside me, proud and unyielding. Harris Construction was no longer in the grip of greed. It was back in the hands of those who would honor his legacy. The fallout from Mark's removal came swiftly. In the weeks that followed, news of his dismissal spread across Boston's business circles like wildfire. Headlines spoke of corporate mismanagement, reckless spending, and a boardroom coup that restored Harris Construction's integrity. Investors who had once been hesitant to stay on now expressed relief. The city whispered not about Julia's failure, but about her courage. Inside our family, however, the damage ran deeper. Olivia had endured years of defending her husband, believing his promises, and covering for his arrogance. She had hoped that beneath the bluster, there was still the man she had once fallen in love with. But as Mark's downfall unfolded, she could no longer deny the truth. One evening, after Jacob was tucked into bed, Olivia sat across from Mark at the dining table. Divorce papers lay neatly in front of her. Her voice trembled, but her resolve was clear. It's over, Mark. You betrayed our family, our father's legacy, and even me. You never cared about building a life. You only cared about power. Mark sneered, though his confidence was beginning to crack. You think you're better than me? You'd be nothing without me. Harris Construction would have collapsed without my vision. Olivia's eyes hardened. That's where you're wrong. The company is surviving in spite of you, not because of you. Julia proved that. He tried to laugh it off, but his eyes darted nervously toward the papers. You won't go through with this. You need me. No, she said firmly. Jacob and I need peace. And that's something you'll never give us. The pen scratched across the paper as she signed her name, sealing the decision she had avoided for too long. Mark slammed his fist on the table, but there was no power left behind the gesture. Outside the home, his decline accelerated. The lavish lifestyle he had clung to unraveled quickly. Creditors came knocking, and the so-called investments he had poured company money into were exposed as scams. A slick-talking broker had swindled him, leaving him drowning in debt. The expensive suits, the golf club memberships, the dinners that once made him feel invincible, all vanished in a matter of months. I watched from a distance, not with joy, but with a quiet sense of justice. Mark had gambled with my father's legacy, and now he had lost everything, including the family he had once claimed to love. Boston's elite, who had once entertained his arrogance, now avoided him entirely. He was no longer a figure of power, but a cautionary tale whispered at business luncheons. Through it all, Olivia remained composed. She focused on Jacob, on building a life free from deceit. "I wasted too much time hoping he'd change," she told me one evening. "But now I'm free. We're free." Her strength gave me hope. Together, we had endured the storm, and together we were beginning to heal. Mark's chapter in our story was closing, not with triumph, but with the quiet collapse of a man consumed by greed. The dust finally began to settle. With Mark gone, Harris Construction slowly found its rhythm again. The board elected a new CEO from among my father's most trusted executives, a steady, experienced man who valued loyalty over profit margins. For the first time in months, the office corridors no longer echoed with fear or arrogance. Instead, there was a cautious sense of hope, as though the company itself could breathe again. I chose not to take the title of CEO. That was never my dream. My place wasn't in the boardroom, but in protecting my father's legacy from the shadows, ensuring it remained strong for generations to come. I still taught part-time at a local school, finding peace in the laughter of children, but now I balanced that with a new role, a guardian of Harris Construction's future. At home, life felt lighter. My mother, Susan, seemed to stand taller, freed from the burden of watching her husband's hard work crumble. Olivia, though scarred from betrayal, grew stronger each day, pouring her energy into raising Jacob. She smiled more often now, though the pain of the past still lingered in her eyes. Jacob became our little beacon of joy. One evening, as we sat together on the porch of the old house, he climbed onto my lap and looked at me with wide, innocent eyes. "When I grow up, Aunt Julia," he said, "I want to be like Grandpa Harris. I'll build big buildings and make everyone proud." His words caught me off guard, bringing a lump to my throat. I hugged him tightly, whispering, "You already make us proud, Jacob." Susan's eyes glistened as she listened, and Olivia reached over to squeeze my hand. In that quiet moment, surrounded by the people who mattered most, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: peace. I thought back to the truck, the letter, and the secret account my father had entrusted to my mother. Those things weren't just gifts, they were symbols of his faith in me. He might not have said it often, but I finally understood. He had seen me not as a disappointment, but as his daughter, strong enough to fight when it mattered most. The storm of greed had passed, leaving behind lessons carved deep into our hearts. And as the city of Boston continued to rise with its towers of steel and glass, so too did our family, rebuilt not on wealth or power, but on loyalty, resilience, and love. Thank you for watching this story until the end. If you enjoyed it, make sure to like, leave your comments, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories. Your support helps us share even more inspiring and emotional journeys with you. See you in the next story.